This is Going Under, Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. I'm your host, Vahid Sadrzadeh, and we are back in studio, the confines, man. Friendly confines.
We've been traveling quite a bit, so Atlanta, Baltimore. I've been all over the place. Texas, Reno, all over the place.
And if you would like to see, this is...
That's true.
We were already starting this with paid promotion. If you would like to see some of those travels, we have them up on Brian's website and his social media channels. If you're not following, it's at Dr. Brian Schmutzler. If you're not following the content, you should be already. If you're a medical fan, a student, and even if you're not, I mean, it's just plain old good content. If you're a patient, and which 100% of us in the world are.
At some point will be, of course.
A lot has been happening. Of course, we've been traveling, you just said. Obviously in the world of medical news, there has been one big breaking news story that not only affects the medical community, but affects the broadcasting community as well. So as we get started here, Brian, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce today's topic.
Yeah, sure.
If this is the first time, it's either your first time listening to the podcast, we touch on anesthesia, of course. That's our main focus, but we also dive into some questions that you sent Brian on social media and his website, and also some news stories that have just come out. And right now we're going to focus on one of those news stories and kind of tackle that as it relates to the medical community. On April 23rd, the FTC announced that basically a rule banning non-competes, which is huge. FTC's final rule, and I'm reading this right from the FTC.gov website. FTC's final rule will generate over 8,500 new businesses each year, raise worker wages, lower healthcare costs, and boost innovation. That's what they say. But essentially what happened was the Federal Trade Commission issued a final rule to promote competition by banning non-competes nationwide, protecting the fundamental freedom of workers to change jobs, increasing innovation, and fostering new business formation. Now, in this article, they're obviously spinning it, Brian.
Of course, and it's the government. So, all this, like, we're creating jobs and stuff. Some of that's sort of pie in the sky, but
they're spinning it in a positive light. Let's talk about the positive and not so positive of banning and making non-competes illegal. So break down, if you could, what non-competes are first.
Sure. So just a little bit of background. Basically what a non-compete is that if you sign on with an employer, for me, let's say as an anesthesiologist, I sign on with an employer, a hospital, a private practice group. I say, I'm going to sign on. You're going to pay me. I'm going to have a job with you. But in order to do that, I can't compete with you, meaning I can't perform anesthesia, or a lot of them even say any medical practice at all, within a certain distance of the practice for a certain amount of time. So we'll dive into my own experience with non-competes a little bit later. But in general, most states, including Indiana where I am, either ban non-competes or have been very, very negative on non-competes for years. The impetus in the past for non-competes was good, I think, right? So you spend the employer spends a lot of time, energy, effort, training to get an employee up to be a solid employee. The problem, as in everything that starts out as a good idea, is, okay, great, it started out this way, but now employers have so much more power than employees because employers are so much bigger. It's not like you're working for mom and pop, 5-employee shop. You're working for big multinational organizations. They have so much of the power, and now they're using the non-competes, and have been for decades now, to confine workers so that they can't leave. Not that they can compete, but just so they can't leave, so that they don't have to go and re-recruit and that sort of stuff. So, like I said, most states have been relatively negative on non-competes. Several ban them. Indiana does not up to this point. Several states do, particularly in medical practice. But and one point of contention here, this is funny because every time I talk to the attorneys, they laugh about this. No attorney has non-competes. Attorneys will not sign non-competes. It's like against their ethics or something like that. I'm not an attorney.
Like, will the companies present them with one?
Nope.
Or no, they're just,
nope.
They know, like, straight away they're not going to do it.
Yep, correct. Yep. Attorneys don't sign non-competes, which speaks volumes to me, right? They're the ones who write the non-competes, but they won't sign them, right? So So let me tell you a little bit about what a non-compete looks like, and I'll just use my experience in anesthesia. So a non-compete for me looked like so when I signed on initially in private practice, in order for the privilege of working for the company, I was not allowed to work at any place. I was not allowed to do medicine of any kind, not just anesthesia, medicine of any kind, in any place in St. Joseph County, which is the county that I live and work in, for at least 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that limited me. I could go to a county, and I actually did, but I could go to a neighboring county, which, maybe is reasonable, maybe not. But I couldn't do anything in St. Joe County. And so that's fairly restrictive. That wasn't quite as, injurious to me because I was able to go over to Elkhart County and work for a year. But, there are some non-competes. Many of these national anesthesia companies have non-competes that span 50 miles, 60 miles,
sure,
80 miles from any site that anesthesia company owns.
Oh, so
you got a national anesthesia company that has, 50 contracts, 80 contracts, 100 contracts across 30 states, and you can't work within 80 to 100 miles of any of those contracts or any of those hospitals. Where are you going to go, right? You're stuck.
And how many physicians and or broadcasters, because this happens in the journalism world a lot.
Right, we should get into that too.
We will, but how many of these physicians have lawyers to look over these non-compete contracts and say, hey, this is not benefiting you.
Right. Well, I mean, okay, so shameless plug here. You should have an attorney, and just advice in general, you should have an attorney review any contract you ever sign. Right. No matter what the contract is, an attorney should look it over, especially if you're signing an employment agreement or any sort of contract that has any sort of restriction in it, non-compete, non-disclosure, any of that sort of stuff. So you should always have an attorney look it over. Fine. But let's say, for instance, me coming out of residency, I only have so many choices, and every choice that I had a non-compete. So it didn't really matter what I did. I was going to have to sign a non-compete no matter what. Right. And so my big issue, and so let's take this in a few different parts. Just in general, as a pretty staunch, free market guy, I think that non-competes just don't make sense, right? If a company wants to keep you, they should treat you well enough that you want to stay, and they should pay you a fair market value, and then you're not going to leave. I mean, you're not going to leave just because the competitor down the street wants you, right? You might leave because, your family member gets transferred or somebody moves or you have to take care of a parent, fine, right? But you're not going to just walk down the street to a competitor and leave if you're happy and treated well and paid well.
This is going back to something that you and I talked about, I don't, not too long ago, but I've been talking to a number of former colleagues that have said, you don't leave because of anything other than the culture of a company.
Correct, yeah.
I think we were talking to Kurt about that.
Yeah, we were talking about Kurt. Yeah, to Kurt about it.
Yeah. Nobody leaves a company if they're happy.
Right.
Within a company.
Right. And happiness is there's a lot of things that can create happiness. Culture is a big part of it. Money, obviously you have to, but it's not, you have to be paid the top for your position. You just have to be paid reasonable for the work that you do.
Sure.
Right. And then your boss, right? That's the big thing is who's your boss.
Right.
So you look at all three of those things and if they're good, if you're in a good spot with those, then why would you leave?
Right.
So that's the fundamentals of non-competes in general. Then you've got non-competes for physicians. So I have argued, as long as I've been able to argue about non-competes, is that, so let's say, for instance, a surgeon, right? I'm not a surgeon, but let's say, for instance, a surgeon has an entire clientele of patients, 100, 150 patients. That physician decides to leave, okay? So my argument's been, okay, you can either tell him he can't stay in the area.
Yep.
But he can take his patients with him, or he or she can not stay in the, or can stay in the area, but can't have their patients. But what most of the non-competes for physicians do is say you can't have either. So you can't solicit your patients to come with you,
right?
Nor can you stay in the area. I don't think that's fair. Choose one or the other, right? If you're gonna have a non-compete, choose one or the other. Okay.
Right. So
either,
don't make them do both.
Right.
Just make them do one or the other.
Right. And you choose, right? You want to stay in the area and start all over with new patients? Fine.
Would you rather, if you were the one, would you rather be able to solicit your patients, or would you rather be able to work in the 60-mile region?
Yeah, it depends how long the distance is. So 60 miles, I'm going to say you can have my patients, I'll start over because I'm that good, right?
Right.
If it's 15 miles, then I probably say, I'll take the patients.
Got it.
So, yeah. But that goes to the next point, which is anesthesia specific. I don't have a patient load. I don't have any of my own patients. And it would be extremely rare, if not impossible, for someone to pick a facility or a surgeon based on an anesthesiologist or a CRNA. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. You're not going to the hospital and saying like, hey, I don't care who my surgeon is. I don't care what hospital it is. I just want Dr. Brian Schmutzler to be my anesthesiologist. Nobody says that, right? So it really makes no sense because there's not a what's called protectable business interest for an anesthesiologist or a CRNA to have a non-compete. There's nothing to protect, right? I don't have patients. So if I leave, it's one less body that you have, but I'm not taking patients and I'm not taking your business. So I don't understand what the impetus to have a non-compete is in anesthesia.
And well, in medicine in general, right? I mean, like I'm just looking, and all I can compare and contrast is what I'm used to and where I've come from.
Right.
So I come from the broadcasting side, which if there's anything other than medicine that benefits from this for the employees side of things, it's broadcasting.
Right.
So whether you're talking about South Bend, Indiana, or Madison, Wisconsin, or Atlanta, Georgia, or even New York and the bigger markets or national markets,
right,
a lot of these companies, bigger companies, put these in place so as a broadcaster, they own the rights to you.
Right.
So if you said, contracts are one thing, right? So let's just be very clear. Contracts are one thing. Non-competes are something else. They are completely different.
Yeah. Non-competes are within contracts.
Correct.
But having a contract does not mean having a non-compete.
Correct. You could have a contract without a non-compete, but you can't have the one without the other.
Right. Yeah.
So when you're talking about a broadcasting contract, let's say you're in this market, they don't want you to go from the ABC station
to the NBC station.
To the NBC station as soon as your contract is up.
Right.
Especially if you leave on your own free will.
Correct.
So let's say they don't re-sign you.
Right.
Well, then my non-compete is, because most of the time in that non-compete contract, they're going to say, if you leave on your own free will, you have to sit out at least 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. So in medicine and anesthesia, it's not that way. It's we fire you, you leave on your own accord, we lose the contract.
Matter.
Doesn't matter. You're confined by this non-compete.
Sometimes in broadcasting that can change. Like if you're fired, a lot of the times you're free to do whatever. But listen, it depends on what your role is too.
Right.
If you're a main anchor and you're Peter Jennings, let's say.
Sure.
Or David Muir.
Megyn Kelly is the big one.
Megyn Kelly. Right? Like either the company's going to have to pay for you to bring you over, but it happened within our market recently, right? Where like you have a transfer of somebody that's very important to one company goes over to another company. Yeah. Well, somebody's going to buy that contract, right? Or somebody's going to.
So do yours, and this is maybe it's a dumb question, but do the contracts in the broadcasting field have buyouts in them?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
So my first non-compete had no buyout. No number in it at all. So they could have said anything they wanted. They could say, you can't do it regardless.
Yeah.
Or they could say it's $50 million.
Well, and I think this is where me not knowing the medical field as well as the broadcasting field, in the broadcasting field, in a smaller market, your non-compete as like a reporter or an anchor is going to be way less than if you were Megyn Kelly or Tucker Carlson, whose buyout was like millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And this is the same for, I'm guessing, medicine too, depending on where you are, who you are.
Yeah, it just depends, yeah.
And is it only for physicians? Do they have non-competes for nurses? Do they have them for CRNAs? Do they have them for...
So what my experience is, and I could be totally wrong on this, is advanced practice, so a CRNA, a nurse practitioner, or somebody like that, and physicians. In general, nurses don't have non-competes because really they're they're contract labor, even though they're employees. They're contract labor, right? They come in and they do a shift, they go home, which is my argument for anesthesia as well. But they don't do their own billing, they don't do their own collecting. So nurses, we've got several nurses at Unity that will leave and go work at St. Joe, or go from St. Joe to Unity, or work at both places at the same time, right? So I don't think that applies for nursing. It probably doesn't apply for let's say environmental services, a cook at the hospital, right? But but it does apply for CRNAs. It does apply for anesthesiologists.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think the arguments, you can make an argument for both sides, right? And honestly, like, I never saw the good in it. I mean, just from an employee standpoint, right? I'm coming from an employee standpoint.
Sure.
Why are you going to limit where I can work? Wouldn't you rather just have me in this community than go report at some other community?
Right. But even from an employee, so I am an employer. We have mostly independent contractors, but I don't have non-competes in any of my contracts. Never have. Don't put a non-compete in my contract. What I do to protect myself, my protectable business interest, is I have a non-solicit agreement with the facility. So, for instance, let's say you work for me at, Nuco Hospital, right?
Sure.
You're free to do whatever you want. You want to go from Nuco Hospital to, Hospital C over here that's 5 miles down the road. I don't care. You can do what you want, right? What I can't have happen is I can't have the hospital come to you and say, hey, Vahid, leave Brian and come work for us directly, or come work for whoever, other company that comes in. So I have a non-solicit, because I have a business arrangement with that hospital. I have a non-solicit with the hospital, but I also build in with all except one of my contract, maybe two, excuse me. So with all of my contracts, except maybe one or two, is built in a buyout, and it's a very, very reasonable buyout. So that's the way I protect the business without limiting the employee or limiting the contractor.
So, let me ask, so if I was a physician and I came to work for that hospital and you do business with that hospital, you would say, okay, well, there's a buyout cost here for that, but you can definitely do whatever you want to do.
Right.
There's just a buyout cost. But isn't that a non-compete?
No, it's on the hospital. It's a non-solicit. It's not on you.
It's on the hospital that I'm applying to?
Right, that's trying to take you from me.
That's television. That's television.
But you have a non-compete. They're going to come after you, right? In television?
Yes.
Right. I'm not coming after you. If the hospital does that, I'm coming after the hospital. And then it's business to business. I'm not limiting what you can do. So
if they want you bad enough, they're just going to pay for you.
Of course. Yeah.
And I think that's happened with television. What I do think is this opens the door. Two things happen here. Okay. And you can agree or disagree. And I think that's what we're having this podcast, is to clarify what this is and how it affects people on a day-to-day. I would say this does two things. One, for the employee, it gives them the freedom to not be scared to sign a contract and say, I can't go wherever I want to go.
And the leverage. And to add to that point, even in states where non-competes are disfavored but not completely banned, the threat of fighting the non-compete, it could be $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, right?
Right.
To a company, cost of doing business. To a person, right? To you personally, that's a ton of money.
Right.
So even if you win, you bankrupted yourself trying to win. So sorry, go ahead.
No. And the breaking of the contract, hey, that's on you, right? If you're going to leave somewhere early, either you're going to have another company pay for the contract to be broken early, or I mean, that's on the employee, I think.
Right.
However, when it comes to the non-compete, it gives you peace of mind that, hey, if I leave this job, I can go across the street and look for a job.
Right.
Especially for anchors and people on TV and physicians. Yeah. The other thing I think it does is put a little scare in the companies that used to have non-competes.
Yeah.
Because I think it forces them to think outside of the box, as in, holy crap, is our community here that we've set, is it good enough?
And the culture.
Is the culture good enough to keep employees around?
Right.
When, hey, the hours are getting long.
Yeah.
It's getting tough.
Yeah.
It's an election year. Is it enough when the anesthesiologists are working X amount of hours? Is the culture enough to keep these employees? And I think it's going to change the ethos of some of these companies and how they think.
100%. Yeah. So I'm excited about it, honestly, in both realms, right? As an employer, as a company that contracts people, and as an employee or a company or a person that contracts with companies. Like,
you're excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's good on both ends because it forces my company to be better. I don't use non-competes anyway, but it forces me to be better, and it also forces companies that I work with to be better. So I mean, I like it. I like it overall. I would say so. At the end, we should probably talk about the caveats of what this actually says and
what it means.
Yeah, right. So.
Were you?
Yeah, we can go there. Sure.
Yeah,
So there's a few things in the ruling. Number one, so I believe nonprofits and not-for-profits are exempt from this, right? So if you work directly for a nonprofit or not-for-profit company, technically you can still have a non-compete, although they talk about phasing it out in the FTC ruling. If you are an executive, and they say high-level executive for a company, meaning you have intimate knowledge of the way the company works, and you make over a certain amount of money, I think it's like $160,000 or something like that, then technically your non-compete still holds, although, again, they talk about phasing that out as well. And then there was another caveat in it as well. There was a kind of a third area that they talked about, but it definitely includes physicians, which is great, includes broadcasting, which is great. The other thing is it doesn't take effect for 120 days from when the ruling came out. So
correct.
April 23rd, you're talking about sometime in August. Most of what we're seeing is things change over September 1st. That's what we're seeing in the market.
Do you think there would be a stay here? Do you think that this could take years?
Oh, I mean, it's going to court, right? Of course, there's going to be people who are going to sue and take this to court. I don't know. I don't know the makeup well enough, and it's going to depend what courts they take it through, right? Do they take it through the Ninth Circuit, which is incredibly liberal? Do they take it through the Fifth Circuit, which is pretty conservative? It probably makes it to the Supreme Court. I think overall, right now, the Supreme Court is pretty business friendly, so I think the Supreme Court probably upholds the ruling.
18%, by the way. 18% of Americans will be affected by this, roughly.
Yeah.
That's 30 million people.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one question here?
You can ask me whatever you want.
This is not by no means am I trying to, you stand this way politically or this way. I'm just asking you, what's in it for the Federal Trade Commission? Why now? After years of having this in place, why now make this ruling?
So there's a few things in play here. One, it's an election year, and I'm sure this came down from the Biden administration. He's kind of been on top of this from the beginning. That's something he talked about in his campaign. So fine. I also think there's, particularly in medicine, there is critical mass right now. People are done with non-competes. They have been done with non-competes, especially post-COVID, right? So you're limiting people, especially in anesthesia. You're limiting people who are in huge demand and low supply from going and doing their job. So there's a big push in that in medicine since COVID. And then there's a lot of things going on in the medical world, and even in anesthesia. You talk about one of the big national anesthesia management companies. Several states, the FTC has come down on them for a monopoly. And so this is just a part of it, right? They've said to this company in Texas and in Colorado, hey, you can't enforce your non-competes. You're having a monopoly. You've got to either break up or leave the market, and you can't enforce your non-competes. So there's a lot of momentum, but it's an election year and it's a Biden administration thing. So that's why now.
Got it. It's just really interesting. I mean, like I'm just very interested to see how it works out for the medical community.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested,
of course,
with a vested interest to see how it works out in the broadcasting community, because the initial reaction that I saw from a lot of former colleagues of mine was joy. Was happiness. Like sharing it. Hey, this is awesome.
Yeah. And also looking at least the medical companies that I know, the hospitals, the private practices, all these groups, they're now working on what does a post non-compete world look like. So I think they understand, how do I put this gently? I think for years they've understood that this is not a kosher thing to do. This is not something that we should be doing, but we can get away with it because the laws allow us. I think now they understand that part of the game's over. And so what do we do now to ensure that our business continues without non-competes? And I think most companies have accepted the fact that this is the way things are going to go. So let me share real quick, and then we'll go to the questions. My own story of a non-compete. So I worked for a private practice when I first came out of residency, signed a non-compete. It got fairly contentious when I was leaving, and I left for a number of reasons. But I wanted to stay in St. Joe County. There were a couple of places that offered me jobs in St. Joe County. I had an attorney look at everything. I threw out there all the reasons why the non-compete should not be upheld. We thought we probably would have won, but then I sort of pivoted a little bit, started my own company, and took over a contract in Elkhart County, and it didn't matter at that point. But I personally dealt with non-competes. I personally spent thousands of dollars on attorneys on non-competes. And, you know, from the employee side, it was so onerous on me that I vowed to myself that I would never hold one of my employees or contractors to a non-compete. So I've had my own experience with it. Had this been in place, I would have been able to go and do what I wanted to do, and it wouldn't have been an issue. So
I think it's a really interesting topic, and I'm glad we covered it. Yeah, I know you wanted to cover it, but we're going to keep monitoring it here. And
we'll give updates. And just a disclaimer.
Yep.
I'm not an attorney. Vahid's not an attorney. So you got any questions?
Sure as heck not an attorney. So.
If you got any questions, make sure you ask your attorney or a licensed attorney about what this means for you. I'm not giving you any, just like I don't give medical advice, I'm certainly not giving you any legal advice. So
well, and I think, you brought up a really great point. No matter what you do, no matter what it is, if it's a contract in front of you for employment,
get an attorney.
And have them look it over.
Even if it's $1,000 to look it over and they catch something, that could be millions of dollars in the long run, right? And I'll shout out to my attorney, Barb Fitch, my own personal attorney. She told me, like, there's a non-compete in here. I wouldn't sign that if I were you. And I said, but every contract I got's got a non-compete. Like, I'm just picking the job I want the most. And she's like, yeah, I get it, but I'd push back on the non-compete. We did. Yeah. We said, hey, there's a non-compete in here. I don't want to sign this. And the company I worked for said, okay, then you don't work here. So I didn't really have a choice, but.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good stuff. And of course, if you've got a question or comment, please put it below. And of course, on his social media pages, which is at Dr. Brian Schmutzler. At this time, we're going to answer some questions, hopefully. Yeah. You did... in response to a comment about Sugamadex.
Sugamadex.
Yeah. And there you go.
Sugamadex. The brand name is Bridion. So
okay.
That might be easier to say.
So, PZ_life without regrets.
Fair enough.
In your Instagram comments, in response to your Sugamadex.
Yeah, there you go. Nice.
There we go. What is your experience in patients with asthma reversed with Sugamadex?
Yeah, so I'm pretty liberal with the use of Sugamadex. We had it for a long time. We had it under basically limited use until the ASA, American Society of Anesthesiology, said that it was basically standard of care. So now I use it fairly often. I use it in patients with asthma. I know there are some reports of patients with asthma having an asthmatic attack from it. It's the reason that happens, and I won't get into all the chemistry, but it's a big molecule. When you put big molecules in your body, a lot of times you can have some sort of allergic reaction. You can have an asthma attack, that sort of stuff. I've never seen it, at least not a severe asthma attack. I've had a couple of patients that I've given Sugamadex have a little bit of tightening of their airways. We give a little bit of albuterol, they're fine. So I'm very liberal with it. I'd say the one area that we're really cautious with Sugamadex is women who are on birth control.
Okay.
So it interferes with the birth control. So we always tell patients for, 2-3 days, maybe a week, use another form of birth control besides the pill. That's really the only big side effect that I see. There are reports of allergic reactions. There are reports of sending patients into heart failure. I've just never seen it. It's so rare. I mean, there's 15, 20 years of data out of Europe that Sugamadex is pretty safe. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
We've got Sarah W087 in response to a video that you did about a week ago that was talking about human error.
Okay.
And
Fair
how,
enough. Yeah.
we're all humans, right? What causes, the question she's asking is, what causes lingual nerve damage?
Wow.
I had a procedure years ago and woke up with a numb tongue, and then it was pins and needles for 6 weeks. Anesthesia said it was probably the breathing tube. How does that happen?
Yeah, so we see that from time to time. I say this term a lot, but it is uncommon but not rare. Okay. So what happens is when we put a breathing tube in, particularly an LMA, which we've talked about before,
Sure.
laryngeal mask airway, that sits right there on the back of the tongue. And if it sits in the wrong spot, just like if you lay your arm on the table the wrong way, you can get some nerve irritation, what we call paresthesia. The good thing is that it's almost always sensory only. And when it's sensory only, about 95% of the time you get full recovery. Okay, so it stinks. I know it's not comfortable to have a numb tongue for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or even a year, but it usually recovers. But the reason is that big, either that endotracheal tube or that LMA that sits in your mouth, sits in the back of your throat, and then it kind of rests on the tongue, and it can rest on a part of that nerve that causes that paresthesia.
And our final question is more of a concern from all of our watchers and listeners out there. We did a podcast a few weeks ago about the amount of sleep that you get.
I'm good. I'm good.
I want you to just set the record straight.
Okay.
People were concerned, like, hey, why don't they give you naps after surgeries? And,
Naps.
Are you sure you're not getting enough sleep? and there's some people out there that were like, well, if my anesthesiologist wasn't getting that much sleep, then I totally wouldn't go with that anesthesia. First of all, the question comes from me. I think there are a lot of not only anesthesiologists out there, but a lot of medical professionals out there that probably aren't getting as much sleep as you are.
Yeah, that's true.
And so just kind of set the record straight as to, hey, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but you are getting you've done this for years.
20 plus years, yeah.
And, as it relates to, are you tired? No.
I'm not any more tired than
a normal
than any other person or
profession.
I feel the same amount. So let me say this. They train us in medical school and residency to operate on no sleep. Okay, so I get more sleep now, even though I go to sleep early or go to sleep earlier and wake up very early than I did when I was a resident or than I did when I was taking call.
Is that this is a real question. Like, they want you to be tired when you're. How do they do that? Like, is it built into the curriculum that, hey, we need these doctors tired?
I mean, you learn how to take call and how to function tired when there's somebody there supervising you as a resident, for instance, right? So I have a staff who's standing there, who's paying attention to what I'm doing. And if I'm not functioning well, he or she comes in and says, hey, take a break, right? So you learn how to function as a medical student and resident on minimal sleep. Even, when I first started out as staff, I'd be on call. I might get 2 hours of sleep, and then I'm doing cases the next day. So, I appreciate everybody being concerned about the amount of sleep that I get. I'm fine. I get enough sleep. It's 6 to 6.5 hours most nights, which is plenty for me. Yeah, I've been doing it for years. I'm good. So, but I appreciate the concern.
They just want to make sure that you're okay.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm great. And the one person who said, like, he'd never be my anesthesiologist because he only gets that amount of sleep. Ask your anesthesiologist or CRNA next time that you have a surgery. Hey, were you on call last night? How much sleep did you get? I guarantee it's less than the 6 or 6.5 that I got. So.
If I can get 6.5 a night, I'm great too. Yeah, we all hope for that.
Yeah.
This has been another edition of Going Under Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. I'm Vahid Sadrzadeh. Of course, check out his social media pages and his Patreon page, especially if you're an up-and-coming medical student or resident. You want to learn about those blocks from a trained professional who's been doing it for years. You can do so. It costs minimal amount per month to get the knowledge and experience that you need if you're going out into the medical profession.
Yeah, we were just in Baltimore this past weekend. I was teaching blocks, so you don't have to travel, you don't have to pay very much for it. You can just check it out on Patreon. So
Awesome. All right, check us out. Check Brian out on YouTube, of course, as well, and all his social media channels. It's at Dr. Brian Schmutzler. For Dr. Brian Schmutzler, I'm Vahid Sadrzadeh. We'll see you in the next one.